Hi. So today I want to talk to you about what is meant by ELT and why we should never use that term. All right. So this started a couple of years ago. I was reading a blog page and I saw the author, and I forget who it was, had used the term ELT. Now, at first, I thought he just was a dyslexic typist and he really meant to say ETL. As I read back on his work, it dawned on me that no, that wasn't what he was saying. So, what was this term ELT? Well, when confronted with a term I had never seen before and had no idea what they're talking about, I did what everybody else does. I Googled it. And sure enough, there was a response and there was a list of blog pages that extolled the virtues of ELT and explained just how different ELT was from ETL. Now, before I get into ELT, let's do a quick recap of what is meant by ETL. Here's a good little example, and I apologize, it's a quick and dirty little diagram. What I have is an application or process. It's my ETL process. And what it does is it reads from a source or multiple sources, brings it into memory as a data set or data sets. I then perform a transformation or series transformations. And when I'm happy, I output that data to my target. So I load it into a database, Parquet file, S3 bucket, or even an iceberg table. So again, that's extract from a source, transform it, then load it into a target. Now, another key takeaway about this is first, those three steps are part of an atomic process, meaning it's a single application. So to give you an example, I spin up a Spark instance. I use Spark SQL to read from a database. I get my data set back in memory. I do my transformation or transformations. And a key thing to talk about here is that let's consider it a set of transformations. So it's one or more. And then when I'm happy and satisfied, I write it out to my target. So I load it into my database or my data table, my iceberg table, ETL. What is this ELT thing? All right, as I said earlier, you can Google for it. And if you do it today, what you find is not so much, you'll still find your list of blog pages, but you'll also find vendors now having an ELT story and talking and extolling its virtues. Again, how it's similar to ETL, yet different. All right. So rather than go through all those pages and pick them off one by one, let's go to a page everybody goes to, or a site everybody goes to, and that's Wikipedia. And sure enough, there is a Wikipedia page. Let's pull that page up for a second. And as you can see, the meat of it is just a small single paragraph with some miscellaneous information below, and then references of where people are using it. And I encourage you to look at it, especially the first one is an IBM page. And you can take a look at it and see exactly what I'm talking about. But here on the Wikipedia page, I want to call attention to the first two sentences of their paragraph. And I'm going to read it out loud. Extract, load, transform, ELT, is an alternative to extract, transform, load, ETL, used with data lake implementations. In contrast to ETL, in ELT models, the data is not transformed on entry to the data lake, but stored in its original raw format. All right, so a couple key takeaways here. ELT is similar, yet different from ETL. ELT is used with data lakes, but if you look at it and do it now, we start to see that the vendors are not talking just data lakes, but also the cloud. And most importantly, is a concept that when loading data into a data lake, we don't transform the data and we land it into a staging area as raw as possible. Now, that last point is true. That is what I consider big data 101 or data engineering 101. It's been around for a while. To give you an example of what we're talking about, here's a diagram that I've used in the past that talks about, on the left, having a bunch of database sources, tables, et cetera, data sources, and they're all different silos across the enterprise. And we are now bringing it into our data lake. So we see the hump, we are landing it into the raw zone. That's our staging area. And then we do a process or series of transformations along the way. Now, in general, that series of transformations, we are going from raw data, we are cleansing it, we are aligning it, we are joining it with other data sets. And the end result is we want to create consumable data or data products. So that entire process is known as data curation. And every one of those steps is a single transformation or set of transformations enriching the data. So that is where you'll hear terms like bronze, silver, and gold to help indicate how well that data has been modified or changed or enriched, how much value we've added to that data. Okay, so let's take a look at that same diagram, but using the ELT vernacular and example. Here again, we see that first jump onto the data lake as the ENL steps of ELT. That's extract from my source and loading it onto the data lake. All right. And again, the transformations, I could do an entire talk just on the landing and staging of data on a data lake, best practices, and how to get the most out of it. But we're going to set that aside for now and just say that's ENL. Then the transformations is this nebulous, vague term to describe the series of transformations or data curation as we enrich the data and get to a high value consumable product. Okay. Now, that's fine and good, but let's go back and remember ETL. Well, there's a concept in ETL, and you can find a Wikipedia page on this as well. It's known as the identity transformation. Now, the identity transform, I'm going to read just one sentence from it to describe it and define it. The identity transform is a data transformation that copies the source data into the destination data without change. Now, if you remember earlier, I talked about thinking of our transformations as a set of transformations. Think of the identity transform as being the empty set, so that the transformations is an empty set of transformations or no transformations. Now, when we have the identity transform, let's revisit that diagram. So that first move from the sources to the data lake is really ETL. It's extract, identity transform, load onto the data lake, ETL. And then every single step, as I read from the source being the raw, I'm doing a transformation, enrichment, and it landed into my bronze area. I go from bronze to silver, silver to gold. Every single one of those steps is an ETL process. Now, we consider a set of ETL to be ETL, right? Newsflash, ELT really is ETL. All right, so how did we get here? And for that, I think nobody knows for sure. And the best story is that some marketing droid had to differentiate their product from traditional ETL products. So how it's separate, different, and better, and why you don't want to use your typical ETL products when working in big data or data lakes or to the cloud. Now, what happens when that marketing droid made that statement and differentiated his product? I'm going to make a Dilbert reference here. So if you're not familiar with Dilbert, there's a character, the PHB, pointy-haired boss, and you have to read it. Scott Adams is a genius. Anybody who worked in IT for the last 20 years has probably got their own set of stories of their own PHBs that they've worked with. So anyways, I digress. The pointy-haired boss, whether he attended a trade show, online webinar or had a salesperson come in to make a pitch was confronted with the term ELT and just how it's different from ETL, how if you're using ETL but you're not using ELT, you've got a problem, you need our product. So now the point here, boss, is not the most technical guy. He comes back and goes to his team and says, hey, why aren't we using this ELT thing? He then also goes to other vendors and he goes, hey, George, I just talked with Kevin from company X and their product does ELT. Does your product do ELT? Why should we use your ETL product instead of using this ELT product? So now two things happen. The data guys on the team never heard the term, do what I did, Google it, see it, I go, okay, that's what they mean, whatever. If they're not familiar or have done a lot of big data work, they might buy into it. The vendors, on the other hand, the sales team goes back to their people and say, marketing people said, look, company X is using this term ELT. We need to make up our own ELT story so we can be competitive with it. Otherwise, we're going to get beaten up by all these PHBs. And hence, that's where we get to here we are today. We go on LinkedIn. We see that term used quite a bit. In fact, I'm almost certain somewhere in those new LinkedIn AI questions that they ask us as database experts to answer, that there is one on ELT somewhere. Now, why is this bad? Okay. Well, first off, when we look at data and working with data across the enterprise, if you believe in data mesh, especially if you believe in data mesh, you now have data analysts who are the data owners. You have the DBAs. You have the data engineers, data architects. You have the data scientists, all working with data from the IT perspective, all coming from different backgrounds, different levels of education, and they need to communicate effectively to be able to get the job done, to make sure that there are no mishaps or mistakes. When you use terms like ELT, which are nebulous, that don't really define what you mean, and they're trying to replace an existing term ETL, we start to have communication breakdowns. We want to avoid that. We want to avoid that confusion. I keep thinking back to the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel. And this is what we're starting to see, is that instead of having a clear, concise language, we now have confusion. We could do a thought experiment too. And maybe this might help give a better understanding. Suppose I went out to 1,000 or even 10,000 undergrads, computer science undergrads around the world and said, okay, guys, I want you to write a blog saying that the moon is made of green cheese and that 9 out of 10 mice prefer the moon's green cheese to the stuff they get on Earth. And then I go to one computer science student and said, okay, look, I want you to write a blog that says, all these guys are full of it. They're playing a joke on you. The moon really is made of rocks. Now, in comes ChatGPT, as well as Google search. If you were to search on what is the moon made of, or ask ChatGPT, because there are 10,000 or 1,000 or 10,000 blogs all around the world already indexed, extolling, how great green cheese and the moon's made of green cheese, that becomes the answer. It will downplay or ignore the one voice that says the moon's made of rocks. So we start seeing propagation of misinformation or bad information. That is going to harm us because in IT, in working with data, because we have such various groups out there, and because there are a lot of things that are happening with the data, we need to make sure that we are clean and precise in our language, that there is less confusion, that when we ask somebody to do something, they understand the meaning of what we're trying to do, and they're able to do it because if they don't do it right the first time, it has to be redone, and that increases our expenses. All right. Now, I've said a lot, and I really try to reinforce that you have ETL and that ELT really is ETL, and that we really don't want to confuse people. If you like my video, definitely give me a thumbs up. If you think I'm full of it, I apologize for that. I should never use the thumbs up thing. But again, if you like what I said, give me a thumbs up. If you think I'm off and you disagree with what I'm saying, by all means, please place it in the comments here, or even contact me on LinkedIn. I would love to have a longer debate and to hear why I'm wrong, because maybe I am. But based on everything I've seen and read, ELT really is ETL.